Joining us now is James Rosen, the chief White House correspondent for Newsmax and the author of the great book Scalia. Sir, good to have you with us.
Great to be back with you, my friend.
It must be a wild time. I know it's always wild at the White House, but boy, have you ever seen anything like this?
No, for the simple reason that there's never been anything like this. To see the President of the United States, the sitting President of the United States, questioned aggressively by the White House press corps simply following the news of the day as to the well-being and caliber of his cognitive fitness, there's never been anything like it.
I remember it wasn't that long ago, you were basically the only one in the White House press corps, with a few exceptions, who would even ask a question about his mental fitness, and often to kind of shudders and laughs from the rest of the press corps. Not so now.
I would only correct you to the extent of saying I was one of one at the time. The President gave a news conference on January 19, 2022. This was the famous news conference in which he said that Vladimir Putin has got to invade. He's got to do something at this point, given the buildup along the Ukrainian border at that time. And in any case, yes, I asked a question at that time about the President's cognitive fitness and the already grave concerns that were registering in public polling about it. And he didn't spend a whole lot of time on the answer, and I paid a high price for it. Between Jen Psaki and Karinge Jean-Pierre, who were the press secretaries over the next 8 months, I was not called on in a single briefing for 8 months' time.
Yeah, that's the punishment. They refused to work with you then. So have you noticed one of the things that we're seeing here from our perspective, and I know you're at the White House right now, is it looks like a lot of the various White House talking points on a whole host of issues are all running into each other right now. For instance, one of them is that for years the Biden White House has been claiming the Justice Department is totally independent and is a great institution that Americans should trust. Now they're simultaneously trying to make a case that the Justice Department is actually politicized against Joe Biden. Can you untangle that for us?
Well, the pretzel becomes even more tangled because while on the one hand suggesting that the independent Justice Department works its way through cases and without any interference from the White House, and that anyone who suggests otherwise is damaging our institutions. Here, of course, we just saw the vice president today say that the special counsel was politically motivated, and which would seem to echo the kind of criticism from the right of the Justice Department,
yes,
and would seem to contribute to the damaging of our institutions. At the same time, this White House endorses the overall conclusion of this special counsel, whom they allege to be politically motivated, that there shouldn't have been any charges brought in this case. So it's a kind of a pretzel logic, if you will, to borrow a title from Steely Dan.
Yeah, so there you go. So we should believe portions of this report, but we should believe that other portions are lies, is the White House. That's the talking point at the moment. And
the specific contention is over the president's memory lapses during the 5 hours of interrogation that he endured with the special counsel and his team over 2 days last October. Mm-hmm. And as we all saw yesterday, the special counsel's report concluded that Mr. Biden could not remember either the beginning or ending year of his vice presidency and could not place within several years the date of death or the year of his son. We saw the president that. But it seems that the would put this quickly to rest as to whether this was exaggerated by the special counsel or somehow misrepresented. And today, White House counsel's spokesman, Ian Sams, appeared before the White House press briefing for the first time in more than a year, and was asked directly if the president and attorneys were willing to allow the release in full and unredacted of those 2 days of transcripts of interrogation of the president by the special counsel and his team. And Sams was non-committal, saying it was something they would look at. Certainly concerns about discussion of classified materials in those sessions. But as one noted, the discussion of his dates of vice presidency and the year when his son died, none of that would be classified.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a little challenging to hear you because your signal's breaking up a bit, but just so people can understand it, but what I gathered is Ian Sams was saying that they're considering but non-committal on releasing the transcripts of the exchange with Robert Hur, between the president and Robert Hur. James Rosen, in your view, it seems to me the White House, one of the explanations, to the extent that the White House acknowledges this is real, that the president wasn't giving ready answers to questions about timelines. They said they want us to understand the context of this, which is that the war in Israel had begun as Hamas led their terror attack there. and therefore Biden may have been a little too distracted and stressed out to be able to answer readily. Is that the explanation?
It seemed to be between the lines what White House officials and even the president yesterday himself have been saying. The case they've been making, that they tried to portray it as a demonstration of the president's commitment to get the special counsel and his team everything they needed as soon as they needed it. They even interrupted his management of this international crisis on the 8th and 9th of October to have these sessions. What no one pointed out is that the mere fact that the president was sought for this testimony and that it interrupted his management of an international crisis reflects his own actions. And we wouldn't want to see any commander-in-chief interrupted during an international crisis, let alone for a special counsel investigation that is entirely, in a sense, of the president's own making.
Right, and ultimately that special counsel does actually work for Joe Biden. Biden could tell him, no, it's not happening today.
He could have delayed it, that's correct. But, you know, let's step back here. This was a low moment for the Biden presidency and more broadly for the American presidency. We've seen low moments before. For example, when President Nixon declared in November 1973, "I am not a crook." And here we have President Biden declaring, "My memory's fine," after two mistaken references to dead world leaders in the same week, and even in the very same session where he said his memory is fine, he identified the president of Egypt as the president of Mexico. And to see an American president and then his press secretary and his various aides questioned aggressively about whether the president has his full faculties. As I say, we've never seen anything like it in official Washington, and it represents undeniably a low moment in the annals of the presidency.
Have you noticed, I certainly have, a tenor in the shift of the press's attitude towards the Biden administration in the last day?
I say necessarily toward the administration, but certainly there seems to be an aroused vigor on this particular subject.
Yeah, definitely. On the issue of classified material, the report alleges that Joe Biden willfully retained and then disseminated classified material. Biden offered an explanation last night. He claimed that, it was actually in sharing information with his ghostwriter. I shouldn't have said classified. It was just a letter that I wrote, a multi-page memo that I wrote to Barack Obama that contained my thoughts on the war in Afghanistan. It seems to me, James Rosen, just again from my perspective, that the number two and number one officials in the United States having a secret conversation about the strategy in our number one foreign conflict is almost the most obvious example of something that you would consider classified. Is that as bizarre to you as it is to me?
Well, there's no question that would be classified material. And there were classified markings all over these materials. And some of these materials were designated classified at the TSSCI level, which is the highest classification level available, which is top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. The Special Counsel in his report seems honestly at times to have bent over backwards to avoid charging the president with these records,
yes.
Saying at one point the president should have known. He discussed with his ghostwriter and read to him his own unfiltered notes from meetings in the NSC. He was a classified writer, but I conclude that the president was known for sure that he was disclosing classified information. I mean, that seems tenuous as a conclusion at best.
Yes. Okay, one of the other pieces here is the White House had apparently argued, and the White House is by its own admission saying this, vigorously, to have the language about Biden's memory struck from the report prior to its release. But my impression was that language was essential for understanding why Robert Hur wasn't pursuing charges against Biden, that his lapses in memory would convince a jury not to go after him.
Right. Hur was saying, in essence, that the president would appear before any group of jurors incapable or not competent to stand trial. And yet here you have the White House saying that's all too. We've all spent time around him. The American public sees what they see as well.
Yes.
I have to say, too, from the perspective of the reporters in the White House press briefing, perhaps the crime of which the president was, if he acknowledged his guilt, to use the writer, inexcusable.
I'm sorry, just because you broke up a little bit there, I'm going to see if I can hear you say it this time. So he acknowledged his guilt?
In the eyes of the White House press corps, perhaps the greatest crime and one to which the president confessed his guilt on national television was his use of a ghostwriter. Inexcusable.
I see. I know. I do like how that, like, at this point, like, he's just admitting it. And of course, that's the story of Washington. So many people, but not James Rosen. He wrote a great book. It's called Scalia. Sir, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time today. White House correspondent at Newsmax.